Welcome, my dear friend. In tonight's tale, I become embroiled in the mystery of the collapse of the Mayan Empire. If I can unpuzzle it in time, a modern museum will be able to fund a new cistern for a village in dire need before their dry months peak, and a lost civilization can finally rest peacefully. I am Snorelock Holmes, a detective whose clearest insights arrive when my eyes are closed and the pipe smoke settles. Before we begin, if you like, tell me where you're listening from and which ancient mystery you'd like me to visit next. I do read your notes when the kettle is quiet. Chapter 1. Accounts of Water and Wax. I spent the evening doing a task I find as soothing as it is fussy. I catalogued river sounds on an old wax cylinder recorder. The machine's little horn trembled as it caught each ripple from a sample disc I'd made on a recent walk, and my pencil moved in a neat ledger hand. The river did not care about my categories, but I kept them anyway, steady, skipping, or bank-brushed, because naming things often makes them easier to remember later. In plain terms, it felt good to hear water behaving itself. On the next street, a modest lecture hall hosted a neighborhood talk on ancient droughts. I attended the first half out of courtesy. The speaker was sincere, the slides full of maps and dates, and a small crowd nodded along while the projector clicked like a distant cricket. They spoke about old cities, lakes that receded, and the way people had to agree on when to open gates. It was interesting, and also a little loud for my taste. When questions turned to funding and gala invitations, I slipped out with a shrug to the usher and a quiet, "Thank you. I'll read the notes." The night air outside felt like a cool cloth across the forehead. I walked home at an unhurried pace, cuffs brushing my wrists, and let the city hum without asking me for anything. A cart rattled 2 streets over. Someone laughed softly near the square. The familiar door to my building gave its usual click, and then I was in my study, where the lamp's gold light made a small island against the shelves. I placed the wax cylinder back in its little cotton nest and labeled it with a sober riverton, "Lower Ford, Evening." The pen scratched in a way that reminded me of a beetle under a leaf. I prefer simpler paper noises at night. I set the pen down and checked the window latch. All ordinary, all in order. It occurred to me that this kind of calm, predictable evening is when the most curious cases tend to arrive. Perhaps the world likes to send its puzzles when a mind is already moving slowly. I let my shoulders ease, filled the kettle for tea, and set it to heat while I brought out my pipe. The bowl is smooth from decades of turning between my fingers. I packed it lightly, not for bravado, but for the simple comfort of the ritual. The first drawer felt like a door between rooms opening a fraction. I leaned back in my chair and watched the tiny ember settle into a steady glow. A stack of mail rested on the side table. I meant to ignore it until morning, yet habit won. I sorted by weight and shape, thinning out circulars and placing anything hand-addressed to one side. My name appeared on a cream envelope with a London postmark in a precise hand I didn't recognize. The seal was unremarkable. I added it to the keep pile and finished my tea. Tiredness came in an honest way, as if I had walked to a distant village and returned. My plan was uncomplicated. Finish the pipe, tidy the desk, and call it a night. I was not looking for applause or adventure. Still, I felt that tug, small curiosity that turns a quiet chair into the doorway of a case. I didn't resist it. I rarely do. Chapter 2. A Lily by Bicycle. The next part came with a knock so gentle I almost missed it. When I opened the door, a bicycle courier in a green cap stood there with a padded envelope balanced against his hip. "Delivery for Mr. Holmes?" he said, scanning my face the way a sparrow checks a windowsill. "Signature just here, please." I signed and thanked him. The envelope had that faint smell of clean twine and cardstock. Inside, nested in tissue that crinkled like dry leaves, was a small piece of jade carved in the shape of a water lily. It fit in my palm, cool and surprisingly heavy. The carving was simple and confident. Rounded petals, a slightly domed center. Around the underside ran a narrow groove, a clean track that had clearly sat on a pin or spindle. When I lifted it to my nose, I caught the soft, pine-like scent of resin. Not perfume, more like a sealant. That was a clue worth folding away. A letter sat in the same packet, 2 pages on museum letterhead. I read it at the desk with the lamp lowered. "Mr. Holmes," it began in a steady hand, "my name is Dr. Elena Rios, curator for the Making Waterwork exhibit at the City Museum. We received, on loan, a carved council emblem from a sanctuary site in the Maya lowlands. One tile water lily was missing when the wall piece arrived. A field conservator later found the jade inlay I've enclosed, but we cannot determine with certainty whether it belongs on the emblem. Our label copy and our entire interpretive panel depend on this being right." The next paragraph did not hide the stakes. The exhibit opening triggers funds for a cistern in our partner village. If we delay, their dry season storage will not be built before rains weaken. I do not wish to tell them, after months of planning, that a museum in London could not make up its mind about a single tile. Can you advise? The empty socket on the emblem is very clean and circular, showing no sign of chisel marks. Our team thinks the lily was removed on purpose at some point. We are wary of guessing the purpose. She signed it, then added in a postscript, "If you notice anything about the scent of the piece, do tell. It seems to carry a trace we can't name." I set the letter down and rolled the jade gently with my thumb. A thin rim of wear along the groove told me it had turned, however lightly, against something smooth. If this had always been a fixed tile on a wall, the wear pattern would be different. It would be scuffed and flat on one side, not evenly polished inside a track. I turned it again and caught another breath of resin. Pine, or something like it, used in sealants and incense. It was the scent one might expect near a ritual bowl or near a tool that needed to be watertight. I wondered how the piece had crossed borders so fast. There were no customs stamps, no signs of the usual stops. I considered simple options first. Perhaps the inlay had never left the country. It might be a comparative sample held locally. Or it arrived by an internal loan between institutions that share a back gate most of the public never sees. The bicycle suggested a handoff within the city, not an international shipment. The courier's air of routine also fit, that told me Dr. Rios was close at hand and very keen to keep the chain of custody tidy. I wrote a brief note in pencil on a card. Received intact. Faint resin odor noted. Groove suggests spindle seating, not mere in-wall set. Socket clean implies removal by design. I slid the card under a paperweight so it wouldn't drift under other mail. Then I did what I always do at the start of a case. I said the plain question aloud, to hear if it still made sense outside of my head. Why is the water lily inlay absent from the emblem, and where should it truly sit? The words sounded right. The next line came easily too. If this piece belongs on a device rather than a wall, then it was moved for use, not stolen. The resin suggests sealing or water contact. I am not in the habit of solving questions in one sitting. The knight preferred a slower pace, and so did I. I traced the lily's outline on a sheet of paper and marked the groove. The line looked like a small gear with a soft heart. If that had been a metaphor, I would have apologized to myself, but it was only a sketch, and the meaning was plain. This piece was made to move. Chapter 2. What the clean socket says. I cleared a patch on my desk and set 3 things where I could see them without squinting: the jade lily, the letter, and a fresh page for a list. The list became, as most of my lists do, a simple column of facts and questions. I have learned that if the room is quiet and the ink is honest, the mind will tug on the right thread. Facts first. The lily is carved from jade, a hard stone that takes a fine polish. It shows a narrow groove around the underside, evenly worn, which implies it sat on a pin or spindle and could turn with little friction. It smells faintly of pine resin. Resin is used to seal joints, to set stones in place, and to waterproof things that meet water. The council emblem it supposedly fits into has a clean circular socket with no chisel scars or jagged edges. That means the socket isn't broken. It was made to be empty, or to receive and release a piece without damage. Now the simplest questions. What is missing or wrong? A water lily inlay is not present on the wall emblem. What obvious explanations have already failed? Theft or loss would usually leave tool marks, rough edges, or a chipped stone. A careless restorer would leave adhesive residue, not a neat, smooth socket. Why does this puzzle feel different from an ordinary museum mix-up? Because the lily is not merely a pretty tile. The groove and the wear suggest function. The resin suggests water. The emblem suggests a council and a shared sign. When function, water, and shared sign meet, we are looking at a tool that helps people agree, not at a badge that says they did. I thought of what Dr. Rios had written about the partner village and the cistern. Decisions about water are never abstract to the people who draw it each morning. The classic Maya, whose world touched this lily, understood that very well. They built reservoirs, plastered them smooth, watched the seasons, and tracked their patterns with bowls, rods, and careful marks. They lived in a land of karst, a landscape with porous limestone, where surface water could be rare in the dry months and then abundant. In some places, the water rose through sinkholes and natural wells. They called some of those places sacred, not because water demanded reverence in the air, but because it mattered in plain, daily life. During the years we now call the Terminal Classic, roughly 800 to 950 of our era, the rains in many southern lowlands faltered, sometimes for many years at a stretch. The people there did what people do. They argued, they adapted, and they tried to make shared rules for scarce things. Kings were expected to keep order and make rain through ritual. Engineers and workers kept channels clean. Scribes recorded what happened so there would be memory beyond rumor. When the system strained, every object that helped people measure and agree became precious. I kept the history to one side in my mind, the way a cook keeps a pan warm without boiling it over. The pressing detail was local: a lily that smelled of resin, a socket that invited a part to come and go. The lily shape itself is telling. Water lily signs in many old carvings stand for water brought to the surface, for ponds and calm basins. If someone wanted a marker that said, "This is the level we share," they might choose a lily. The petal tips would be easy to see across a small distance. The round center would sit well on a pin. That left me with a proposal so plain, I said it again out loud. Perhaps the lily is not a decoration at all. Perhaps it belongs on a float, something that rises and falls with water, and the emblem on the wall is a signboard that shows who agreed to use it. If so, it would explain the groove, the resin, and the clean socket. The lily would be set in the wall for ceremony, then moved to a device when the measuring mattered. I wrote, "Check for resin on emblem socket rim," and "Look for matching pinware on any surviving float part." I added a line from the letter to the list of stakes. Cistern funds tied to opening date. It helped me to see it there. A small piece on my desk carried a weight far from my street. On the quiet, the kettle clicked as it cooled. I poured a splash into my cup and found that it had gone lukewarm. I drank it anyway. Sometimes one accepts what is at hand. There were obvious alternative explanations, and I treated them fairly. Perhaps the lily was a later insert, made to complete a damaged emblem. That would make the groove odd, but not impossible. Perhaps it was a gift piece, carried to the sanctuary wall for one solemn day, and then removed to honor a specific person or clan. That would suit the clean socket, but not the resin, unless the gift had been carried in a bowl. These possibilities were polite enough, yet they did not fit as neatly as the idea of a movable marker. I drew a second sketch of the emblem as Dr. Riaz described it, with a circle of lilies around a central sign and one neat empty space. A circle invites completion. An empty space invites a hand to fill it. But the clean socket whispered something else. It said, "Take me out again later." That was different from "replace me, I was broken." It was permission, not apology. I set my pencil down. The study had that safe wait it takes or late in the evening. Nothing strenuous remained to do before bed. The case had arrived. The facts had lined up in a tidy row. There was one more step, and it was the simplest one I know. I made the room quiet enough for sleep. Chapter 4. Leather chair, stone steps. I dimmed the lamps until the brass knobs were cool under my fingertips. I moved the jade lily to a clean saucer near the letter, not for ceremony, but so I wouldn't knock it to the floor when I stood later. The leather of my chair had stored the room's warmth. When I leaned back, it gave it back to me without fuss. My hands lay still on the armrests. The pipe's ember had dwindled to a blush, then to nothing, leaving the bowl sweet and faintly woody. My breath slowed, the way a street empties after the last shop closes. I felt the muscles near my eyes release little knots I hadn't noticed tying during the day. The clock on the shelf ticked evenly, not to drive me on, but to say that time was content for the moment. I watched the last curl of smoke from the pipe drift, thinner and thinner, until it seemed to draw a pale line between the ceiling beams. A few more heartbeats, and the line loosened. At that edge, when the room becomes a map rather than a command, I let the case arrange itself in my mind. A lily that moves, a socket that forgives removal, a resin scent near tools and rites. The words of the letter on the page, the folds where anxious fingers had held it, the tiny smear of ink where a sentence had been corrected. Then the ink smear shifted. It became a patch of still water under starlight. I felt stone under my palm, cool and slightly powdery. My chair was gone. In its place were steps at the edge of a quiet lake. The air was dry in a clean way, like laundry hung in a shaded courtyard. A trace of smoke drifted from a small brazier nearby, and with it came the same pine-warm note I had smelled on the jade. Copal, used as incense, lives in this family of scents. The association was plain. I had come to the place where resin and water met on purpose. The sky was deep and open. A soft chorus of insects framed the night without pressing. Fireflies winked along a path, not as omens, but because that is what they do. I stood and looked around. To my right rose a low wall, plastered smooth, with a circle of carved lilies set into it. One space in the ring was empty, but the socket was polished, not broken. I reached out and touched the edge. It felt like the lip of a bowl. Stone steps led down to a basin carved from the bedrock. Water sat there quiet as a held breath, not far below the steps. At the basin's far side, a channel built of fitted stones entered at an angle, its plaster glimmering faintly where moonlight touched it. The workmanship was confident and human. Whoever built it had done this many times before. On a small landing, a wooden bowl rested upside down and a narrow rod lay beside it. I did not pick them up. I only noticed where they were and how the night gathered around them. I listened for voices. None came immediately. A pair of soft footfalls sounded and then paused. A woman with a shawl over her head crossed the far side of the sanctuary and set a pinch of resin into the brazier. It caught and released a brighter scent into the air. She did not see me. That was not unusual for my dreams. I've learned not to insist on being noticed by everyone. In these places, I am a guest to the work already underway. I looked back to the wall. The incised circle of lilies had, at its center, a shallow disc where water would reflect cleanly if held still. I angled my body and found that when I stood on the third step and shifted slightly left, the moon sat where that center would mirror it. That told me two things in quick order. People here were using reflection to align their sign, and the missing lily's absence would mean the sign was not complete until some ritual action brought it into view. That aligned with the thought that the lily moved between wall and tool. In the distance, I heard a low murmur, kind of careful, practical talk people use when sleep is near and tasks are simple. The words were in a language my waking self does not speak, but my dreaming self understands enough to follow. The tone told me more than the content. No one was shouting. It was the soft, serious register of work shared without boasting. I stood on the step until my toes cooled through the sandal straps I found I was wearing. The lake's broad surface gave back the stars in a ragged band. If there had been a wind, it had gone to bed early. Every detail said the same thing. I had landed at a lakeside sanctuary in the Maya lowlands, at a time when water's level mattered more than anyone's title. From the style of the wall and the shape of the channel, I guessed we were in the 9th century of our era, somewhere in the hard years around 820 or 840, when drought pressed this region. The calendar in my head is not mystical. It's just the kind of pattern reading a person picks up after a lifetime of paying close attention to edges and joints. I placed my hand against the cool stone one more time. The sensation grounded me. The lily would belong here somewhere, but not where a thief would hide it. It would belong in motion, part of a small act that told a larger story. I could feel the case open in the calm night, like a book placed flat and ready. My task in this dream would be simple: to watch, to ask modest questions, and to set one small piece where it belonged. The rest would come step by step, in moonlight and low voices. Chapter 5: 13 Notches. I walked the sanctuary path with the quiet feeling of arriving late to a story that people had been telling each other for years. The lake lay dark and still, with a small, patient sound at the stones, like a sleeping animal breathing. The air smelled faintly of pine resin, sweet and sharp. This was the scent that had followed me from my study into the dream, the same note that clung to the jade inlay on my desk. Here it was not a mystery smell from a parcel. Here it was a normal part of the night. A small figure moved ahead of me, balancing 2 clay jars on a shoulder pole. The jars knocked softly, a sound like careful teeth on a wooden comb. The child set the pole down without a splash and looked at me with steady eyes that had learned to measure before they learned to speak loudly. "Evening," I said. "You're working late." "Water is never late," the child replied, then tilted his chin. "I am Chuj. Who are you?" "A visitor who listens. My name is Snorelock." He accepted this with a small nod, as if I had offered my name the way one offers a tool, useful if sturdy, useless if it bends. He reached behind the jars and lifted a short wooden rod. Along one edge, 13 shallow notches lined up like a quiet set of teeth. "It counts the dry years," he said. He touched each notch with a clean forefinger. 1, 2, 3, and so on. 13. My grandmother says the lake had a high voice before I was born. Now it speaks low. The rod had a faint smear at the tip, as if it had been dipped in something sticky and then wiped. I leaned closer. The smell was pine resin, the same sweet, warm note. It reminded me of how violinists sometimes rub resin on a bow so strings will catch and sing. Here it meant hands had sealed something. "Where do you use the rod, Chuj?" I asked. "At the lake." He thought, then gave the honest answer of a child who has been trusted with a small part of a larger task. "I take it to the steps. Nana Yol Ik tells me to stand very still. She watches the water's skin. She says the rod likes true hands." "Nana Yol Ik?" "The guardian." Chuj nodded and set the rod down with care. "Some people want to keep the rod. The little lord does. He says it belongs to him. But the guardian says it belongs to thirsty mouths." I turned the rod, looked at the notches, and placed my thumb over the glazed smear at the end. There was a faint ridge, as if the rod had pressed against something round, perhaps a pin. The notches were shallow, not deep. They had been made with a careful knife, then polished smooth, so a fingertip would not catch. 13 years, I said. "That's long." "It feels long," Chuj said. "The lake has a long thirst now." He frowned, then studied me the way I had been studying the rod. "You smell like the shrine wall." "Resin?" I asked. "Yes, and smoke from copal. The wall has a circle of lilies. One is missing. That was plain. The council emblem had a neat, empty socket where a jade water lily should fit. Here, a child told me that the missing lily and the measuring of water belonged to the same world of hands and tools. I handed the rod back. "Thank you, Chuj. May I carry one jar for you?" He hesitated, then nodded toward the smaller jar. I lifted it. The clay was cool against my palm, and the water sloshed with a steady rhythm. It was heavy in the way full things are honest. We walked together along the steps, the lake to our right, the sanctuary wall to our left. A carved circle of lilies glowed pale in the moonlight, with one round hole at its bottom edge. The socket was clean and intentional, like a buttonhole sewn by a careful hand. Juge touched the empty place with only 2 fingers, as if touching a friend's sleeve. It used to sit there sometimes, but the guardian said it should move. It moves better than it sits. I glanced at him. "The lily?" "The jade lily," he said. "It likes water." That last line was the kind of sentence that sounds like a riddle, but children rarely mean riddles. He had simply told me that the lily was a thing meant to float, or at least to meet water, not a permanent ornament on a wall. The resin smear on the rod's tip suggested contact with a sealed device, perhaps a bowl or a float. 13 notches told the length of worry. One missing tile told me that part of the council's message had been placed into motion. We reached the platform where Chauge would pour. He set the jars in a low niche. "I have to hurry. If I'm late, the field waits." When the field waits, someone eats dry tortillas. "Go on," I said. "I'll look for Nana Yol Ik." He took up the rod again and hugged it lightly to his chest. "If she listens to you, listen back. She hears things in the water." "I try," I told him. He ran lightly up the steps, the rod tapping his knee with each stride. The taps sounded like a metronome, steady and forgiving. When the sound faded, I stood alone with the moon's road across the lake and the faint resin scent in the air. I looked again at the clean socket in the wall and thought, not stolen, not broken, but repurposed. If a thing is moved by people who care for the water, then it moves with meaning. I needed to find the craftsperson who made the tools that move. Chapter T, in which a float breathes. The half-built gate stood like a patient sketch drawn in stone and plaster. It faced a narrow channel that led from the lake to a reservoir basin. I heard the soft scrape of a trowel before I saw its maker. Ix Tun held the tool like a musician holds a bow. She was small, steady, with hair bound back and a strip of bark cloth wrapped around her forearm against the rough plaster. She glanced at me, and then at my hands, which had the clean softness of someone who writes or thinks more than he hauls. "If you're looking for shade," she said, "there's a bit by the lower sill. If you're looking for payment, we pay in water and flour at the end of the week. If you're looking for answers, say your question plain." "I'm looking for how a water lily can be a tool," I answered. "Not the plant, the jade inlay." She paused, the trowel hovering. Then she set it down and pointed with her chin to a wooden framework in the channel. It was a float, a flat, round raft of stiff wood sealed with resin, with a thin spindle rising from its center like a quiet finger. "We float that in the channel when the council meets," Ix Tun said. "It shows us the level." The float rests against a fixed post under the sill, so it can't drift. The spindle holds a marker. The marker is a lily. People like lilies. It makes them watch. I stepped closer. The spindle's top had a small, round pin, shiny with use. A narrow groove would fit over it and allow a piece to turn a little without wobbling. The resin that sealed the float smelled of the same pine warmth as the rod and the night air. Does the lily always stay on the float? I asked. No, she said, with the practical patience of someone who keeps being asked why a wrench leaves the toolbox. It goes between uses, and sometimes it sits on the wall so people remember to show up. But the real work is here, in water. Wood moves honestly in water. Stone pretends to know. She lifted the float with both hands, dipped it into the channel, and let it settle. It rose and fell, a finger's width with a small, regular breath. As it steadied, the spindle stood straight. She tapped the side. The motion died away. "See how it calms," she said. "If people shout, the water shouts back. If people stand quiet, the water holds still. We wait for the stillness. Then we read." A worker passed us with a basket of crushed shell for the plaster. Ixtun took a handful, sprinkled it over a damp patch, and smoothed with the trowel in long strokes. The float sat in the channel, breathing a little, then resting again. "The lily marker," I said. "Does it have a groove on the back?" "Yes, a narrow groove. The pin takes it." "Why?" I thought of the jade inlay in my study. I thought of my habit of finding, in this dream world, the very object that had weighed against my fingertips before sleep. I slipped a hand into my coat pocket and felt smooth, cool stone meet my palm. When I brought it out, moonlight struck green. The jade was shaped like a water lily, with a slender groove on the back and a faint resin stain at its edge. Ixtun's eyes sharpened, not with greed, but with relief that a piece of her work had not been lost. "You have it. Where did you take it?" "It came to me from far away," I said, "and brought me to you." Simple truth, spoken simply. She took the lily gently, turned it, and let the groove sit on the spindle pin. It clicked softly into place. The fit was precise. The lily could rotate a small degree and no more. She spun it slightly. It settled back to a true point, as if remembering its home. "We place it so the lily points toward the moon road on the water," she said. "Then, when the float is calm, the lily's reflection completes the sign on the wall. People like to see a whole circle. It makes them say yes. And if the lily is missing?" Ixtun shrugged, then made a wry face that was as expressive as any sentence. "Then some people argue about what they can't see. They argue more when they can't see." I ran a finger along the float's resin seal. I smell the same pine-sweet resin on the child's measuring rod.
"Use resin to seal and to teach," she said. "If you smell it, it means someone sealed something or tried to claim it."
Resin leaves a mark. Claim it? A baton can wear resin the way a hand wears rings, she said simply. Someone who handles the float when he shouldn't will carry the scent. She lifted the lily back off the spindle and handed it to me. "The guardian will want to time its return. She respects the lake, and the scribe respects the guardian. The little lord, less so, but even he can count what the water shows." I tucked the jade lily into my pocket again, feeling its cool shape steady against my palm. The float breathed in the channel. Shell dust drifted across the plaster like powdered pearl. The engineer's trowel made small arcs of sound, and the gates opening framed a narrow slice of lake and moon. "Thank you," I said. "I'll ask Nana Yol Ixdu, but go softly," Ixtun replied. "The right is like a bowl. If you bump it, everything ripples." Her words were practical, not mystical. Her eyes returned to her work, and her trowel continued its firm, smoothing song. I left the gate quieter then I had arrived. I knew now that the lily was not but a symbol, but a calibrated marker meant to sit on a float, aligned to the moon's road, and complete, by reflection, a circle that people trusted. Chapter 10, in which ink watches water. The scribe's chamber was cool and smelled of ink, thin, dark and tannic, mixed with the soft smoke of copal. The walls were pale stone darkened by human work. Aj Balam sat with a folded screen of bark paper in his lap, a brush in his hand and a small bowl of soot-black pigment at his side. He looked up when my shadow crossed the lintel. "I speak for records," he said in a low voice. "Who speaks for you?" "No one," I said, which is sometimes easier. "I have a question about a missing lily." His eyes flicked to the far wall where the emblem lay incised. A circle of lilies carved cleanly with a single round socket empty. The emptiness did not look like damage, it looked like a pause. "Ah," he said. "We agreed to move it before the last council." Then we paused. The council tired itself with words. "What was decided?" "Nothing that lasted," he said. He set down the brush, then raised it again and outlined the empty socket in the air, like a person tracing a memory. The lakeside lords spoke. The hill lords spoke. Each wanted to claim the measure right to say when the reservoir gates open and close. Mothers wanted to know when beans would be green. Fathers wanted days that did not end in shouted. "I want a line I can swallow in 10 years without choking." He stood and motioned me closer to the wall. "Do you see this notch on the lower edge?" he asked. "And this small line opposite?" "Yes." When the lily sits on the float's pin and points toward the moon, the lily's reflection climbs to that notch. The wall's carved circle becomes whole in the water. The guardian announces what she sees. The people breathe, and I write. He tapped the bark paper. A record that is less of a spear and more of a net. His words were gentle. The meaning was plain. The emblem was meant to be read with water, not only with eyes. Without the lily in motion, the reflection could not complete the sign, and records could be contested. "And the 13 notches?" I asked. Aj Ba'alam turned his brush and looked at the wooden handle as if it still had bark. 13 years. A long, thin animal with too many ribs. The guardian had Chauj carry a rod to the steps and touch each notch, so the number would be said aloud and no one could pretend to forget. "Who asked to move the lily from the wall first?" "Ix Tun, the engineer," he said. "She wanted people to look at water first, wall second." I agreed. The junior lord agreed in words and disagreed in hands. In hands? He touched the float when it was not his time to touch it. He handled the bowl with resin. He wished to say the lily would only fit under his house lintel and that the circle could only be made there. Did the guardian accept that? Aj Ba'alam's mouth made a shape like a straight line. She does not refuse in the way some people refuse. She refuses the way a still pond refuses a thrown stone. It ripples, then returns to stillness. That she did remove the lily from sight that night. He lowered his voice, and the air seemed to listen. She said, "If a thing makes people peaceful, it cannot live entirely in one house." Then she asked me to write a line that would let people think later without shame. I told her I needed to see the circle whole, even if only in the bowl, to write a true line. I nodded. The scribe wanted the reflected image to be clear so that his words would not hold too much heat later. He watched water the way a surgeon watches breath. Ink and water, joined by a simple device. "Will you attend tonight's rite?" I asked. "If the guardian calls, I step," he said. "If the junior lord calls, I listen from a little distance. Come back to the wall when the moon sits lower. The reflection grows kinder then, the winds fall." He dipped his brush and drew a slow, short line on the bark paper, drying it by blowing across the page with a soft, even breath. I could hear the low lake through the window aperture. It sounded patient. The carved circle on the wall waited without complaint. "One more question," I said. "Do you know why the socket is so clean? It looks as if the piece was removed with consent." Aj Ba'alam smiled with only his eyes. "Consent is a word too big for a socket. But yes, we shaped it to take and release the lily many times. We always meant it to move." He touched the empty round and then his brush. "Something fixed can still be part of a moving truth." He went back to his seat, and I stepped out into the dim corridor, feeling the air shift from ink cool to night warm. By then I knew the essentials had lined up: a float with a spindle pin, a lily with a groove, a wall that was, in some sense, a mirror's partner. I had a direction, which is all a detective ever really needs to walk slowly and comfortably toward an answer. Chapter 8, in which the steps hold a breath. I returned to the sanctuary steps and sat halfway down, where my shoulders found a smooth patch of stone worn by many backs. The water lay close. It lifted and set itself down, a hand learning its own weight. Fireflies marked the path like tiny patient notes in a score that did not need to hurry. I set my hands on my knees and let them rest there. The resin scent was faint, threads of it still in the air. The coolness of the steps drew a little heat from my palms, then gave it back. I watched a single ripple move toward the wall and fade before touching it, like a thought that decides not to speak. By now I knew 3 things clearly. First, the lily is a movable marker that belongs on a float's pin. It is not mere decoration. It is a calibrated piece used to point and align. Second, the circle on the wall becomes whole only when the lily sits on the float and the water is still enough to hold a true reflection. The sign is meant to be read in water as much as in stone. Third, the 13 notches on the rod are a public count of long worry. The years are measured for the sake of memory and fairness, not odds for record. These 3 points told me the lily's absence was not theft, but choice. A choice made to protect a common measure from being claimed by one hand. Still, a tool that is hidden cannot do its work. We needed a moment where safety and usefulness met. The guardian would be the hinge of that moment. Around a hinge, things move gently and surely. A small fish turned under the surface as if rolling in its sleep. A little breeze came and went like a quiet conversation in the next room. I closed my eyes for a short count and opened them again. The moon had shifted a finger width in dream time that felt right. Footsteps approached, slow and even. Chuji's lighter tap-tap had passed some time before. These were older steps. I looked up as a woman's figure paused at the top of the steps. She held a wide, shallow bowl in both hands, the way one holds a child's face, level and kind. I did not stand. I let her choose the distance. She walked down 3 steps and stopped when her feet were level with my chest. Her hair was braided and wrapped. A thin cord cut from fibrous bark tied it. Her eyes reflected the lake's mildness. She smelled of fresh resin and cool stone. "Nana yol ik," I said. She inclined her head in acknowledgement, not surprise. "You've been speaking with children, with builders, and with ink," she said. "That is a good order." "I have a piece that belongs to you," I told her simply. "To the lake," she corrected, without warmth or coldness. "But yes, you carry its shape in your pocket." I touched my coat lightly. "I do." She stepped closer and held out the bowl. A thin line of pine resin sang at the rim where it had sealed something before. "Hold this," she said. "Keep it level, like your own breath in a quiet room." I took the bowl. It was cool against my hands, and the water inside made the weight more honest. Keeping it level made my shoulders soften. That is a trick water plays on you. If you're stiff, it tells on you. Nana yol ik watched my posture, then nodded. She pointed to a calm patch of the lake where the moonlight did not chatter. "There," she said. "When the council gathered last time, the little lord stood there. He wanted to hold the bowl and say when the reflection was right. He wanted to say it because people were watching his mouth. I took the lily away instead, because he would have claimed the measure as his own, because he would have made the measure into a promise that only he could keep. That is not how water works," she said. "Water is everyone's shoulder." She gestured. I followed her and sat near the edge. She took the bowl back and held it so still that the water on its surface became a clean, dark lens. She angled it to catch the wall. The lilies carved in stone rose upside down and quiet inside the bowl's circle. The empty socket on the wall was a small hole of night here. In the bowl, it felt larger, like a missing word in a short sentence. "Do you see?" she asked. "I do," I said. Without the lily, the circle is a nearly closed mouth. With it, the mouth would say yes. She breathed once through her nose, a restrained smile. "Words like yours make wars small." She set the bowl down on the step beside me. "Tonight, the wind will fall more. The scribe will come back with his brush. The engineer will stand by the float with her trowel drying in her hands. The little lord will try to stand where speech stands. I will not let him hold the bowl. I will ask someone who knows how to hold breath to set the lily on the float." "Someone like me," I said softly. "We'll see if your hands are as honest then as they are now," she answered. "For now, keep the lily hidden. Do not let it become a symbol. A symbol is a lid on a pot. It keeps steam where no one needs it. Keep it a tool." She lifted the bowl again and poured its water slowly back into the lake. The surface took it without a sound. As she turned to go, she added, "I removed the lily because I would rather stall a sentence than harm a neighbor. But the sentence must be finished, not by me alone." She left the stairs as quietly as the last ripple left the bowl. I sat for a while longer. When I rose, I did so the way a person stands after a long conversation, carefully and without scraping the chair. The moon had paused on a rung of sky. It would descend another notch soon. I had an invitation to keep. Chapter 9. The bowl shows a circle. Later, near the sanctuary's lower landing, Nana yol ik met me with more intention. The air felt firmer, like cloth stretched before a painter begin. A few people had gathered at the edges. Ik's tun, her hands scrubbed clean but still marked by fine white shell powder. Ba'alam holding his folded screen. Two elders seated on a low bench with their weight shared between their feet and a stick. Chu'uj hovering just out of the way, the notched rod tucked against his side. The guardian carried the bowl again. In the dark, the resin along its rim gleamed faintly, a thin line like a calm horizon at sea. She gestured to a flat stone at the very edge of the water. "Stand here," she told me. "We'll let the lake set the pace." I stood there. The stone felt cool through the soles of my dream shoes. I reached into my pocket and felt the jade lily. It was still cool, still shaped like green water caught in motion, still carrying the faint taste of resin. The junior lord arrived with 3 attendants. A Haupeten wore a woven cloak edged with small shells that clicked softly when he turned. In his right hand, he held a baton polished by years of palms. He looked at me with the attentive boredom of someone who has more plans than ours. "Guardian," he said in a careful, public voice, "we gather. Let the measure be known." "We will let the measure show itself," Nana Yol-ik replied. She placed the bowl in my hands and looked at me, not at him. A whole Peyton lifted his baton and tapped it once against his palm. The sound had resin in it, a stickiness you could hear. I noticed darker streaks along the baton's grip, against the lighter wood. Resin is like flour on a baker's apron. It tells you what a person has been doing, even when the oven is cold. Ike's ton lowered the float into the channel. The water took it with a small sigh. The spindle stood up, clean and waiting. Ba'alam moved to the side, where he could see both the wall and the water's skin. Chuj stood on his toes. "You removed the lily last time," Ahau said, not quite accusing, not quite forgiving. "We cannot keep arguing. People need instruction. People need water," the guardian said, that as evenly. He glanced at the wall. If the wall is to be whole again, the lily must return. And if the lily returns, it should return to a place that is honored. "The lake is honored," she said. I did not speak. I balanced the bowl, and by balancing it, I felt my own breathing grow quieter. I bent my elbows a fraction until the water inside formed a smooth disc. The carved circle of lilies appeared again within it, inverted and still. The empty socket looked like an unblinking eye. "We can let the lily show us where honor sits," Ba'alam said softly. His voice did not push, it made room. The guardian nodded to me. I touched the lily with my thumb on its back groove. The jade had a coldness that made my blood slow by a degree, which calmed me. I did not lift it high for everyone to see. I moved it as one moves a tool from one hand to the other. A breeze passed. The float shifted and then steadied. Ix Tun watched the spindle without blinking. She raised 2 fingers, then lowered them when the small motion stopped. The bowl in my hands mirrored the wall and the moon. "Wait, Nana Yol," Ix said. It was not a command in the sense of a superior barking. It was more like someone telling you that the last blueberry is in the bottom of the bowl, so tilt gently. We waited. The air cooled slightly. The shell fringe on the Lord's cloak clicked once, then stopped. "Now," she said. It was less a word than an opening. I did not place the lily yet. I held it and looked once at Ahau-Pten. He looked back with a face composed for witnesses. His baton's resin sheen caught a small shine from the moon. "Your baton has the same resin that seals the float," I said in a mild tone. You've held the float before. I oversee, he said. You touched a shared tool in secret, the guardian said, with neither anger nor softness. We all touch shared tools, but timing matters. He lowered his baton a fraction. And now? Now we show it together, Ba'alam said. He looked at me. Let the lake teach us one shape. That was all. In the next part of the night, I would place the lily on the float's pin. But first, the guardian wanted one more test of calm and one more breath taken by all the faces in the circle. The lily waited in my hand. I had time to count 2 slow breaths. The water in the bowl hardly moved. It felt like holding a small moon in my palms. Remember, Nana Yol Ik said, so only those closest could hear. This piece is not a crown. It is not a badge. It is a finger that points. I closed my hand around the jade gently, like closing a book at night to save the page. When I opened it again, the lily looked only like what it was, a shaped stone with a groove, ready to do its job. Chapter 10. A Baton and its Story. Ahar Peyton stepped forward enough to be seen and not enough to block the moon from the water. His shell fringe clicked a soft warning to himself, as if the garment were reminding him to be careful. He held up the baton, and the ends were smooth from generations of thumbs, but the mid-grip had new smudges, darker in narrow streaks. You suggest I have taken what is not mine, he said crisply, keeping his voice level. I hold tools of the house so they do not get lost. Tools of the water are held by the water. Nana Yol, Ik replied. Her tone remained like a level string. I looked at Ik's tongue. She watched the baton, then the float. Her mouth made the minimum shape needed for speech. The baton smells like the float, she said. Resin is honest. She would not accuse beyond that. She let the material speak. Ba'alam unfolded a small section of his bark paper. He did not write yet. He showed the empty space as if to say, here is the field in which our words will grow. He spoke gently. Lord, this is not a theft case, it is a reading case. We will read the circle tonight. The hands that help us read will gain honor by helping. The hands that insist on reading alone will fail to read. A whole Petton's face softened a shade. Not much, but enough. He was a man used to being looked at when the first word was spoken, and now the lake was being asked to speak first. I understood the discomfort. People who carry symbols carry them because they fear silence as much as they love order. If the lily must be set, he said, let it be set on my word. Nana Yol Ik did not say yes or no. She turned to me. Is the bowl telling you that the wind has fallen enough? I looked into the water. Its surface was now a flat skin, and the reflected lily circle on the wall trembled less than a breath. My arms felt that they could carry the bowl for a long time without shaking. That told me the air was steady. It is quiet, I said. She nodded once. Soon, Chuj took one step closer, but still kept himself in the space where children stand when adults speak. He looked between the baton, the float, and the lily in my palm, as if memorizing a recipe he might be asked to cook when older. His small mouth shaped a thought. If the lily sits, will the 13 notches stop? No, Ba'alam said softly. They tell what has been. The lily will help us write what we will do. Ahal Payten flicked his baton again in a small gesture he might not have known he was doing. More resin showed where his thumb rubbed. Sometimes, people tell you more with the movement they did not prepare. There is a way for you to keep honor without keeping the tool, I said to him. If you stand with the elders and put your baton across both their hands at the moment the circle completes, you will have given your strength to a shared thing. Everyone will remember that picture. He glanced at the elders. Their faces were carved by years, but their eyes were bright. One elder tapped his own stick with a finger, an echo of the baton's tap. I can do that, Ahau Ptana said. He said it as if choosing between two robes. I can honor the elders and the water. Good, Nana Yol Ik said. Then we can teach the circle tonight and not a quarrel. She looked at the bowl as if it were a child she would not hurry. We still wait a moment. While we stood there, I let the scene sink into the part of me that saves, the smell of resin. The sound of the channel's small repeating wave, the weight of the bowl, the spindle's clean shadow in the water, the little lord's baton with its sticky truths, the child's notched rod with its unarguable count, the engineer's float, built to listen to water more than to words, the scribe's page, blank and kind. This was the shape of a decision, not a single dramatic gesture, but a nudge that aligned many small pieces. The lily would sit on the float, the reflection would complete the circle, the record would be written. The Lord would shift his stance without publicly bending too far to break. To reach that moment, we needed only patience. In a thirsty land, patience is a kind of drink. Chapter 11, in which we gather the 5 points. A lamp was lit on a low platform behind us, and its yellow glow arrived like a second, smaller moon. I rested the bowl on the flat stone for a moment and rolled my shoulders to remind them of their work. The lamp's flame made a light that curled like a cat's tail and then straightened. It did not flicker much. That pleased the guardian. I looked at the float, the wall, and the people arranged in a half circle. The half circle would soon become whole. Before it did, I counted what I knew in my own head. It is a habit I keep when I feel both safe and close to an answer. I knew 5 points. 1. The lily is a precise marker, carved with a groove to seat on a pin. It belongs on the float. 2. The emblem on the wall is completed not by stone but by a reflection. The circle is finished in water when the lily points true. 3. The 13 notches on the child's rod measure a long, thin drought that has pressed on everyone's time and temper. 4. The guardian removed the lily to prevent it from being taken hostage by a single house. Her removal was a break on escalation, not a theft. 5. The junior lord's baton bears resin, proving his hands on the float and the bowl. He is not a villain. He is a man who tried to fix a shared thing under his emblem. Now he needs a path to keep honor while letting the measure be shared. These points made a gentle map. The action required of me was simple. Place the lily on the float's pin at the moment the water holds still. Angle the lily so it points along the moon's path toward the wall. Let the reflection complete the circle inside the bowl. Say one clear sentence to catch the meaning we are already living, that the measure belongs to all. Then let the scribe write, the the guardian teach, and the Lord reframe his role. I breathed once, long and even, then another. The bowl's surface grew smoother to my eyes as my breath slowed. That is a trick my lungs play on me, and I am glad they do. I picked up the bowl again and felt that it sat lighter for the same weight. My hands had learned the balance. Nana Yol Ik watched my fingers. "Good," she said quietly. "You hold the stillness without squeezing it." Ik's tongue looked at the spindle. "Now, if you like," she said. Her voice was almost not a voice, but a shaped breath. Ajba'alam nodded in rhythm with the falling of the tiny lamp flame. "I can see the line on the wall that waits for its partner," he said. Ahaupetan stepped toward the elders. He did not speak, which was the wisest thing he could do. He placed his baton across their two sticks, making a small bridge at knee height. The elders' hands rested on their sticks and his baton together. A picture was forming even before the lily sat. I took the jade from my pocket and held it flat in my palm for a heartbeat. Its green collected a little of the lamplight and gave it back cool. Then I set my fingers around it in a way that would not drop it and bent toward the float's pin. I did not set it yet. I paused a whisper longer to let the breeze finish crossing the channel. I could feel the breath of the night settle. Chewy voice came in a small thread from the side. "Is it now?" "Almost," the guardian murmured. "We wait for the last word from the bowl." Silence decided to be our friend for a moment. It sat with us. The moon's path on the lake became a softer stripe. The bowl's mirrored lilies stopped shivering. Even the shell fringe held its tongue. "Ready, Nana Yol," Nick said. That is where Act 2 leads us, to the edge of the act breath before the word. All the people were in place. The pieces had been explained and understood. The path was kind and plain. What remained was one small action, timed to the quiet. I would set the lily on the float and let the circle complete itself. But that belongs to the next motion. I let my hands hover over the pin and the jade. The night held me the way a well-stitched hammock holds a tired backsteady with room to sway. I looked across at Ajbalam, who had his brush poised above the page. His eyes were soft and exact. Ik's Tun's trowel leaned against the low wall, its handle catching a stripe of lamplight. The elders breathed together, slow, almost one breath. One more soft recap slid through my mind, the way a final check slides along a lock before it opens. We gathered craft, memory, right timing, and a practical phrase. We had made room for the Lord to step sideways into a better place. We had kept the tool a tool. The lake had agreed to be still. That was enough. "Soon," I said, "more to the night than to anyone." And the night, which was generous, answered by not rushing me at all. Chapter 12, in which a lily finds its place. I stood with the cool of night on my forearms and the familiar scent of resin in my nose. The lake lay like a dark plate. The sanctuary wall showed the circle of lilies, elegant and incomplete where the socket was empty. I could hear the soft scrape of a trowel be set down and the wooden click of Chuji's measuring rod as he tapped it gently against his shin. The moon hung low enough to lay a clean path of light across the water. It was quiet, and that quiet held the case together in my mind. By then, the pieces were simple. The socket on the emblem was clean and round, so the lily wasn't pried out in anger. The jade's thin groove matched a pin on the float in the channel. The resin I kept noticing, pine sweet and warm.
Mark the rod, the bowl, and even the Lord's baton.
13 shallow notches on the rod counted lean years. The scribe had said the reflection completed the council sign, but only when the lily sat where it was meant to sit. The thing I had to do was modest and precise. Set the lily on the float at the right time with the right people watching, so the sign could speak in water rather than on stone. I caught myself checking other possibilities the way I always do. Perhaps the lily was only decorative and the groove a craftsman's flourish. Perhaps the resin was drift from 100 tasks. Perhaps the reflection made patterns out of anything. I turned the jade over in my palm as I thought this. It was smooth from handling, yet the groove inside showed fine circular wear, as if it had turned around a spindle many times. Decoration doesn't spin. Tools do. The scent was strongest along the groove and weakest on the flat face, which pointed to sealing and motion, not display. As for reflections, the guardian had already shown me the bowl, reversed but crisp. Water tells the truth if you help it be still. Nana Yol Ik stood at my side, her hands steady and bare. She gave me a small nod. "The lake is calm enough," she said softly. "If it is to be done, do it now." Her voice carried no theatre, only care. Aj Ba'alam, the scribe, brought his bark paper bundle and his brush. "I will stand back," he murmured, "and only write what is seen." He glanced once at the junior lord, who lingered in shadow under a lintel, baton held low, eyes tracking every move, face composed because it was expected to be composed. Ixtun, the engineer, adjusted the float in its small channel, a shallow sleeve of plaster that opened onto the lake through a mouth like a square fish. The float's spindle rose like a thin finger. She wiped the top with a cloth that smelled faintly of resin and smoke, then stepped away. "The pin is true," she said. "If it sits, it sits." Chuji's eyes were bright and patient. He had put the measuring rod across his knees where he crouched, as if it were a sleeping dog. He whispered a count to himself and then fell silent, watching the bowl in Nana Yol Ik's hands. Children are very good at stillness when they understand why it matters. I held the jade. It felt cooler than the air. The carved petals were clean and shallow, like a map of ripples. I put my thumb in the groove once more and felt its narrow track. Then I stepped to the channel. The float bobbed slightly, then settled. The spindle waited. "Let the measure be shared," I said. It was not grand. It was more like naming what we were already doing. I set the jade on the pin. The groove took it easily, and the water beneath made a quiet, content sound as the added weight brought the float to a gentle stop. There was no drama. The lily turned a finger's width and then did not turn at all. The fit was correct, like a lid finding its true jar. I felt the relief that comes when something sits where it has long meant to sit. Nana Yol Ik lifted the bowl and held it level at her chest. "Stand as you would if this were an omen," she said, to no one in particular, and to everyone at once. Her words were practical, a reminder to hold, not a flourish. She waited for a breath or two, letting any small waves fall quiet. Then she angled the bowl so the float and the wall entered the same shallow field of reflected moonlight. The emblem on the wall appeared in the bowl reversed and wholed. The empty socket was no longer empty. The lily on the float filled it by reflection. The circle of lilies closed on itself. It was a simple trick of optics, but there is nothing deceitful about a mirror that shows two things as one when they are aligned. I exhaled without meaning to. Ba'alam did not exclaim. He simply moved closer and dipped his brush in ink. "Hold," he said, not to command, but to time his hand. He marked the day count for the right, a quiet line of numbers he had prepared but not dared to complete. He did not need to write a speech or an accusation. The reflection was the speech, and the number said when it was spoken. Ahau Peyton made a small adjustment to his stance. I noticed the baton again. Faint resin along the grip, rubbed shiny by worry and handling. He could have argued that a wall sign was only a sign, or that a float was only a float. He did not. He was clever enough to see that he could step away from a fight without looking defeated if he framed the device as stewardship. "Let it be known," he said, "that in my watch we keep the measure level." He said it as a lord would, and because it was true, it served him and everyone else at once. Ixtun touched the side of the channel with her fingertips. "With the lily in, the gates will agree," she said to me under her breath. "We can set the spillway at the same mark for both sides. No arguing numbers that move." Her face eased. Craft likes certainty the way a joint likes oil. Chuge leaned forward until his chin was nearly on his hands. "It's a circle again," he whispered, as if the emblem were a friend returning. He tapped the first of his 13 notches very softly, a private echo of the long, dry stretch. He was not celebrating a victory. He was acknowledging that the counting had a purpose other than fear. I checked myself against the urge to make a second speech. "I have learned to let the world see itself when it will." The lake had made its point. Nana Yol Ik lowered the bowl and set it carefully on a flat slab. A thread of water ran down the side and kissed the stone with a tiny sound. "I will teach the bowl to the villages," she said to me and to Ixtun, "and I will keep the lily's use out of any one hand. The codex can sleep where arguments cannot find it. The way to hold it level is to hold it together." Then she looked at Ba'alam. "Hide your pages where you said." Ba'alam nodded. "Under the bench behind the third step," he answered in the quiet shorthand of people who have already planned for trouble. "Wrapped in cloth with resin at the knots. If I am asked, I will say the sign was seen and the number written. That is all." He glanced once more at the wall, then at the bowl, as if to confirm the order of things in his mind. I stepped back from the channel and felt the cool grit of plaster under my heel. The moonlight or the water changed slightly as a cloud passed over and then moved on. I looked again at the lily. It sat calmly, the grove nestled on its pin, the float now part of a sentence that was both ritual and tool. The truth of this case had never been an argument between belief and mechanism. It was how the two met in public, with the water itself as witness. I allowed myself a brief comparison, one only to myself. The lily had been a missing word in a line I could almost recite. Now the line read cleanly, and ordinary work could begin. The plain meaning was that people could agree on when to open and close the gates without invoking pride. That would save more crops than any speech. I thanked Nana Yol Ik with a small bow. "It was yours to begin with," she said. "You only placed it where our hands can reach it again." I stood a little while longer, My breath matched the small lift and fall of the float. I listened for any sign of unrest and heard none. I smelled the resin and, under it, the faint mineral smell of the lake. The case had shifted from question to agreement, which is the only kind of ending I trust. Chapter 13, in which the water remembers the circle. From there, the night moved in small, clear steps. Ajbi-Alam rolled his paper carefully, breathed on the ink to dry it, and tied it with a narrow strip. He did not hide it immediately. He waited, because a record should not vanish too quickly after it is made. He returned to the wall, touched the carved lilies with the back of his fingers, and stood beside the empty socket without embarrassment. "A signboard on the wall," he said softly, "and the working sign in water. Two parts of the same thought." He liked sentences that could be defended. Ix-Tun beckoned two apprentices who moved as if they had done this 100 times in their heads and only now were allowed to touch the pieces. They carried the short gate planks to the channel mouth, set them in, and waited for her nod. She measured by eye and then by the lily's position, which is the way good builders move from sense to standard. "A finger below the lily's rim for the first week," she said, "and then we will watch the maze and the sky together." She was already thinking in contingencies, not decrees. Ahaupetan stayed near the lintel. He turned his baton once and then set it aside on purpose. He placed his hands behind his back in a posture that was more open than it had been. "We will send 3 crews at dawn to the lower plaster," he announced, "and the same number to the eastern ditch. The sign speaks to all sides." There was no anger in it. He had found a way to translate the device into his language of authority without changing its use. That is how pride becomes service. The change in the air was gentle. People who had been stiff at the edges relaxed a little. 2 women, who had been waiting with baskets of lime powder, came forward, asked no questions, and began to dust the fresh plaster margins where water might creep. The scrape of their hands looked like a soft snowfall in the moonlight. A boy I had not noticed before eased his shoulders and yawned. Even the insects seemed to hum at a lower pitch. Chuj came up beside me and held out the rod. "Do you want to count?" he asked. I took it, felt the shallow notches under my fingertips, and tapped each one in turn. 13, I said, handing it back. "It's a serious number." He nodded, because in his world serious numbers were not for speeches, but for carrying water to the right rows. Nana Yolik lifted the bowl again and poured it slowly onto the steps, letting the water sheet down and vanish into the stone seams. "To remove words that don't belong," she said in a very practical tone. She wiped the inside of the bowl dry with a cloth, then warmed a small bead of resin between her fingers and rubbed it lightly along the rim, a habit that helped the surface form a clean skin the next time. She had a method for everything she did. Ajbi-Alam caught my eye and tilted his head toward the steps. We walked together to the bench behind the 3rd step. He slid the roll of paper into a cavity that had probably once been a builder's handhold and pressed a stone back into place. The stone fit so neatly that I had to look twice to see the seam. He sealed the edge with a smear of resin, not too much, it's enough to keep ants and damp away. "I know where it is," he said to me, "and so do you. That is enough." It was a way of sharing responsibility without heavy ceremony. He returned to the wall and added the final detail. A small sign by the edge of the emblem, a count of the day, the phase of the moon, and after a brief consultation with Ix-ton, measure of the lily at rest, he made the strokes with no flourish. They could be read by any literate visitor without needing him to stand beside and explain. That is how records should be. I found a spot near a low lamp and sat, letting my legs feel their full weight. I gave my mind a small, deliberate inventory. The lily was on the float where it belonged. The reflection had completed the circle and made a true sign in public. The scribe had written the day and the measure and hidden a fuller accounting where it could be found by decent people. The guardian had taken charge of teaching the bowl to those who needed it. The junior lord had reframed his pride as stewardship and ordered crews to useful places. It was enough. If storms came or stayed away, the community had a standard that did not belong to one hand. I considered the modern end of the case as well. In my chair at home, a jade lily waited beside an envelope. It would smell of resin in the morning as it did now. The curator's letter had been precise. She needed to open an exhibit so a village could get a cistern at the start of a dry season. Authenticity was not only about labels, it was about funding and trust. If I could tell her where to test for resin and where to look for matching fragments, she could give both the museum and the partner village what they needed. That was the chain I hoped to touch. A breeze pushed across the water. The lily on the float did not turn. It was a good sign. I went back to the channel and crouched. I put my finger near the float without touching it and watched the tiny boundary where wood met water. No bubbles, no wobble. This was not luck or a conjurer's trick. It was a balance made by careful hands. "Will you stay for the dawn?" Ix-ton asked. She did not sound eager or indifferent, shoot open to either answer. "I won't," I said. "My work was this small part." I looked at the lily and then at her. "You will make the rest into days." She smiled with her eyes. "We always do." Chuj had settled against the base of the wall. He hugged his rod like a bundle of dry reeds and closed his eyes, not quite asleep and not needing to pretend he was awake. A whole Petan spoke briefly with two captains and then stepped into the background, a bit smaller now that the device had its own authority. Nana Yol-ik set the empty bowl on its shelf and brushed her palms together, a soft sound that meant nothing more dramatic than finished for tonight. I stood at the water's edge one last time. The constellation of lilies on the wall was reflected faintly, even without the bowl, a ghost of the real event. I memorized the angle so I could describe it later in plain words. The lily's groove, the spindle's pin, the resin's line. The 13 notches matched to a long drought. A simple action at the right moment had joined them. I felt a calm satisfaction, the kind that doesn't ask for applause. It is the feeling of a weight being set down in a place where it will not roll. The dream began to thin at the edges, as dreams do when their task is done. The soft scrape of plaster smoothed into the tick of a familiar clock. The scent of resin softened into the faint smoke of my own cooled pipe. The lake's black surface darkened once more, and I felt the welcome texture of my chair. I opened my eyes to the dim lamp of my study and the quiet shape of the jade lily where I had left it. My fingers found the same groove and the same coolness I had known in the dream. The resin's piney note was there, faint but real, like a remembered word. I took a sheet of paper and wrote to Dr. Elena Rios in tidy lines. I told her to test for pine resin along the inner groove of the jade and inside the emblem's empty socket. especially near the lower arc where liquid would settle. I suggested gentle microscopy for micro scratches in a circular pattern, evidence of rotation around a pin. I recommended a careful search along the old shore slump of the sanctuary's lake, where wood tends to rest after waterlines drop, for fragments of a wooden spindle or float. I added that the lily should be presented in the exhibit as a movable gauge marker that completed the emblem by reflection during a drought council, not as a fixed tile. I told her to consider a small bowl of water with a projected reflection at the display so visitors could see the principle without touching precious things. I closed by saying that the story supports the Cistern project with something better than romance, a shared measure that saved arguments and probably saved fields. I sealed the letter and placed the jade gently beside it. For a moment I closed my eyes again and saw only the quiet of the lake and the circle made whole. That was quite enough. Chapter 13, in which we drift home. I stayed in the chair for a while, because sitting is a fine way to honor a solved problem. My hand rested palm down on the desk, feeling the slight unevenness where wood grain rises under old varnish. The study had settled into its nighttime manners. The clock ticked with even patience. Somewhere outside, a late cart rattled once and faded. A small draft moved the edge of a paper, and then that too was still. I tidied without thinking about it. The pipe went into its stand. The pouch went back into the drawer. I smoothed the padded envelope and slid my letter beneath the jade so the two waited together, ready for the morning post. I checked that the lamp had enough oil to see me to bed, though the light was already more than I needed. Everyday arrangements calm the mind as surely as any balm. I stood and stretched in a small way, as if reaching twice far enough to touch a high shelf and then deciding it could wait. The window pane felt cool under my fingertips. I pressed lightly and watched a smear of city light shift across it and disappear. It reminded me of the bowl's surface, a thin skin that shows only what you hold steady. The plain meaning was that the night was calm. I walked slowly across the room. My steps made a soft sound on the old floorboards, regular and unhurried. My coat slid from the back of the chair with a modest sigh and found its hook on the wall. I smoothed the collar as if smoothing a thought. The air smelled faintly of paper and the last shade of smoke, an honest scent of work done and put away. On the bookshelf sat a small stack of field reports that would benefit from Dr. Rios's good news. I touched the top one and left it there. At the edge of the carpet, a loose thread had been bothering me for weeks. I tucked it under with the toe of my slipper and felt a ridiculous sense of achievement, which is the best kind at this hour. I paused by the desk again and let my eyes rest on the jade. In the low light, it was a quiet dark green, almost grey. I could still feel its weight in my palm and the slight catch where the groove begins. I imagined the float's thin spindle rising through it and the way the lily had turned that one small distance before it settled. The image was simple enough to carry into sleep without snagging on the mind. It was not a symbol anymore. It was a part that worked because other parts respected it. When I turned down the lamp, its flame leaned once and then stood straight. I took that as a friendly habit of fire rather than a sign of anything. Shadows took up their places in the corners of the room. The clock sounded a little louder now that light had stepped back, but not in a way that asked for attention. I let it keep time without me. I moved to the bedroom and found the bed as I had left it. which I suppose is one of the best things that can be said of a bed. The sheets were cool and modest. I sat on the edge and let my hands rest on my thighs. The pillow gave with that soft resistance that suggests it remembers the shape of a head and does not mind remembering it again. I lay back and listened for any last worry. None arrived. My mind worked through the simple chain once more, out of habit and for pleasure. A clean socket, a jade lily with a groove, resin where moving parts touch, a notched rod for lean years, a scribe who preferred what could be checked, a guardian who kept uses safe from hands that wanted more than their share, an engineer who wanted gates to agree, a child who counted true, a lord who learned to stand near a device that did not need him, a reflection that closed a circle, a phrase spoken aloud not to command, but to describe. Let the measure be shared. The cart outside made its last pass. The night took on that particular quiet that is not the absence of sound, but the absence of fuss. I could almost hear water moving in channels hundreds of years and half a world away, not as a call, but as a calm background to a place settled to rest. The thought made my breathing even. The body likes a story that ends in work assigned and accepted by the right hands. I thought of the partner village waiting for a cistern. Such projects are not grand monuments, they are bowls turned into ground. I saw in my mind a line of neighbors passing stones, passing lime, passing jars of water, each one measuring by eye and then by a mark that all agree is level. The image sat neatly beside the lily on the float and did not ask to replace it. It was only a later verse of the same song. I listened for the postman's bicycle bell, though it was far too late for it. In the morning, I would send the letter and the jade back with a courteous note about tracking and handling and how to display a reflection without drenching a gallery. For now, the plan was in place, and plans prefer darkness when they have nothing left to gather. A corner of the curtain lifted slightly as the night wind made its round. The fabric settled again without ceremony. I realized my shoulders had sunk deeper into the bed. There was no need to pull them up again. Rest can continue to do its work long after a case is solved. Before sleep took me fully, I offered one last thought to the room, as much for myself as for anyone who might pass through this story later. A small marker made big talk smaller. I do not mind repeating that to myself when the world seems inclined to argue. A shared measure is a kind of kindness. If you enjoyed drifting through this mystery with me, feel free to subscribe so we can explore more together. Now, let the quiet of this story carry you the rest of the way into sleep.